318 The China Study. Years prior to her graduate studies, I was her advisor for the nutrition part of her dissertation research. The U.S. Department of Agriculture administers the school lunch program to 28 million children, largely relying on an inventory of government-subsidized foods. The government program, as it now stands, uses mostly animal-based products and even requires that participating schools make available cow's milk. At the local level, this usually means that consumption of milk is mandatory. Dr. Demas's innovative research on the school lunch program was a great success. Children loved the learning style and were excited to eat the healthy foods when they went through the lunch line. The children then convinced their parents to eat the healthy food at home. Dr. Demas's program won national awards for the most creative implementation of the dietary guidelines and excellence in nutrition education. The program has proven to be of interest to more than 300 school lunch and behavioral rehabilitation programs around the U.S., including schools in areas as widely dispersed as Hawaii, Florida, Indiana, New England, California, and New Mexico. In this effort, Dr. Demas has organized a nonprofit foundation, Food Studies Institute, Trumansburg, New York, and written a curriculum, Food is Elementary. And here's the kicker. Dr. Demas's program is entirely plant-based. I had the opportunity to go to Washington and talk with Dr. Eileen Kennedy, who, at the time, was the director of the Center for Nutrition Policy and Promotion at the USDA. Dr. Kennedy was deeply involved both in the school lunch program and the Dietary Guidelines Committee, on which it was revealed that she had ties to the dairy industry. She is now the Deputy Undersecretary for the USDA's Research, Education, and Economics Division. The topic of our discussion was Dr. Demas's innovative school lunch program and how it was garnering national attention. At the end of this discussion, I said to her, "You know, that program is entirely plant-based." She looked at me, wagged her finger as if I were being a bad boy, and said, "We can't have that." I have come to the conclusion that when it comes to health, government is not for the people, it is for the food industry and the pharmaceutical industry at the expense of the people. It is a systemic problem where industry, academia, and government combine to determine the health of this country. Industry provides funding for public health reports, and academic leaders with industry ties play key roles in developing them. A revolving door exists between government jobs and industry. Government, is it for the people? 319. Jobs, and government research funding goes to the development of drugs and devices instead of healthy nutrition. It is a system built by people who play their isolated parts, oftentimes unaware of the top decision makers and their ulterior motivations. The system is a waste of taxpayer money and is profoundly damaging to our health. Big medicine, whose health are they protecting? When is the last time that you went to the doctor and he or she told you what to eat or what not to eat? You've probably never had that experience. But the vast majority of Americans will fall prey to one of the chronic diseases of affluence discussed in Part 2, and, as you have seen, there is a wealth of published research that suggests these diseases are a result of poor nutrition, not poor genes or bad luck. So why doesn't the medical system take nutrition seriously? 4 words: money, ego, power, and control. While it is unfair to generalize about individual doctors, it is safe to say that the system they work in, the system that currently takes responsibility for promoting The health of Americans is failing us. No one knows this better than the tiny minority of doctors who treat their patients from a nutritional perspective. Two of the most prominent doctors in this minority have spent many years emphasizing diet and health, both in public within their profession and in private with their patients. They have had exceptionally impressive results protecting their patients' health. These two doctors are Caldwell B. Esselstyn, Jr., whose work I discussed in Chapter 5, and John McDougall, an internist. My son Tom and I sat down with these men recently to discuss their experience advocating a whole foods, plant-based diet in the medical setting. 322 The China Study. Dr. Sprouts. Long before our country was founded, Dutch pioneers had settled in the Hudson Valley north of New York City. One of these settler families were the Esselstyns. They started farming a plot of land in 1675. 9 generations later, that farm still belongs to the Esselstyn family. Dr. Esselstyn and his wife Ann own the several hundred-acre Hudson Valley farm, just over 2 hours north of New York City. They spent the summer of 2003 living in the country, working the farm, growing a garden, hosting their kids and grandkids and enjoying a more relaxed life than what they're used to in Cleveland, Ohio. S and N have a modest house, a large, rectangular, converted storage building. The simplicity of it belies the fact that this is one of the oldest family farms in America. Only upon closer inspection does it become apparent that there is something unusual about this place. Hanging on the wall is a framed certificate from New York State given to the Esselstyn family in recognition of their family farm, a farm that has now seen parts of 5 different centuries. Nearby an oar hangs on the wall. It is the oar S used in 1955 as an oarsman at Yale, when Yale beat Harvard by 5 seconds. S explains he has 3 other oars, 2 from beating Harvard in other years, and 1 for winning the gold medal in the Olympics with the Yale crew in 1956. Downstairs, there is an exceptionally old photograph of S's great-grandfather on the farm. Around the corner there's an impressive-looking museum-style schematic of the Esselstyn family tree, and on the other end of the hall, there's a large black and white picture of S's father standing in front of a microphone, exchanging comments with John F. Kennedy during a White House address. Despite its humble appearance, it is very clear that this is a place with a distinguished history. After touring the farm on a tractor, we sat down with S and asked him about his past. After graduating from Yale, he was trained as a surgeon at the Cleveland Clinic and at St. George's Hospital in London. He remembers fondly some of his most influential mentors, Dr. George Kreil, Jr., Dr. Turnbull, and Dr. Brooke. Dr. Kreil, a giant at the Cleveland Clinic, eventually became S's father-in-law upon S's marriage to Anne. Dr. Kreil was a man of exceptional accomplishment, playing a courageous, leading role in questioning the macabre surgery called radical mastectomy. Dr. Turnbull and Dr. Brooke were also renowned big medicine, whose health are they protecting? 323 surgeons. In addition, S's own father was a distinguished physician with a national reputation. But, as S remembers, despite being health experts, all 4 of these men were ravaged by cardiovascular disease. His own father had a heart attack at age 42 and Dr. Brooke had a heart attack at age 52. These were the men he looked up to, and when it came to cardiovascular disease, all of them were helpless. Shaking his head, S said, "You can't escape this disease." These people, who were giants in the prime of their years, just withered. As he took a moment to remember his father, he said, "It was the last year or two of my dad's life, and we were just strolling along one day. He was saying, we are going to have to show people how to lead healthier lives." He was right on it. He was intensely interested in preventive medicine, but he didn't have any information. His father's interest has been a driving influence in S's life. Following in these men's footsteps, S went on to amass an extraordinarily impressive list of awards and credentials: an Olympic gold medal in rowing, a Bronze Star for military service in Vietnam, President of the Staff, member of the Board of Governors, Chairman of the Breast Cancer Task Force, and head of the section of thyroid and parathyroid surgery at the Cleveland Clinic, one of the top-ranked medical institutions in the world, president of the American Association of Endocrine Surgeons, over 100 professional scientific articles, and inclusion on a list in 1994 to 95 of the best doctors in America. 2. He remembers, for about a 10 to 15-year period I was the top earner in the Department of General Surgery. As Dr. Kryle's son-in-law, I was panicked about not pulling my weight. I didn't get home until late at night, but I had a position that was secure. When the then president of the American Medical Association needed thyroid surgery, he wanted S to be the one to operate. But despite the accolades, the titles, and the awards, something was not right. So often, S patients did not regain their health, even after his best efforts. As S described it, he had this haunting feeling that was really beginning to bother me. I kept looking at how the patients were doing after these operations. Slightly exasperated, he said, "What is the survival rate for cancer of the colon? It's not so great." He recounted the operation for colon cancer on one of his best friends. During surgery, they saw that the cancer had spread throughout the intestines. S lowered his voice ever so slightly in remembering this, saying, "You get there after the horse has left the barn." In thinking about all the breast 324 the China study surgery he had done, the lumpectomies and mastectomies, he expressed disgust at the idea of disfiguring somebody when you know that you haven't changed their chances for recovery. He began to do some soul searching. What is my epitaph going to be? 5,000 mastectomies. You've disfigured more women than anybody else in Ohio. Dropping the sarcasm, he said with sincerity, "I think everybody likes to leave the planet thinking that maybe, you've helped a little." Dr. Esselstyn began studying the literature on the diseases he commonly treated. He read some of the popular work of Dr. John McDougall, who had just written a best-selling diet and health book called The McDougall Plan. 3. He read the scientific literature that compared international disease rates and lifestyle choices, and a study by a University of Chicago pathologist showing that a low-fat, low-cholesterol diet fed to non-human primates could reverse atherosclerosis. He came to the realization that the diseases that so often plagued his patients were due to a diet rich in meat, fat and highly refined foods. As mentioned in Chapter 5, he got the idea to treat heart patients with a low-fat, plant-based diet, and in 1985 went to the head of the Cleveland Clinic to discuss his study. She said that nobody had ever shown that heart disease in humans could be reversed by using dietary treatment. Still, S knew he was on the right track and went about quietly conducting his study over the next several years. The study he published, of 18 patients with heart disease, demonstrated the most dramatic reversal of heart disease in the history of medicine, simply by using a low-fat, plant-based diet and a minimal amount of cholesterol-reducing medication. Esselstyn has become a champion of dietary treatment of disease, and he has the data to prove his case. But it hasn't been easy. Rather than recognizing him as a hero, some in the medical establishment would rather he disappear. Somewhere in this transition from top-ranked, self-described macho, hard-ass surgeon to dietary advocate, he has become known, behind his back, as Dr. Sprouts. A daunting task. What's interesting about this story is that a man who had reached the pinnacle of a highly respected profession dared to try something different, succeeded, and then quickly found himself on the outside of 81G medicine. Whose health are they protecting? 325. The establishment looking in. He had threatened the status quo by his circumvention of standard treatments. Some of S's colleagues have disparaged his treatment as being too extreme. Some doctors have dismissed it by saying, "I think the research in this area is pretty soft," which is an absurd comment considering the breadth and depth of the international studies, the animal studies and the intervention studies. Some doctors have said to S, "Yeah, okay, but nobody is going to eat like that. I can't even get my patients to stop smoking." S's response was, "Well, you really have no training in this. This requires just as much expertise as doing a bypass. It takes 3 hours for me to counsel a patient, not to mention the diligence required for the constant follow-up and monitoring of the patient's health." One patient told his cardiologist that he wanted to see S and commit to a dietary program to reverse his heart disease. The cardiologist responded, "Now you listen to me. There is no way to reverse this disease. You'd think that doctors would be more excited about healing their patients." In talking about doctors and their unwillingness to embrace a whole foods, plant-based diet, S says, "You can't get frustrated. These aren't evil people. There are 60 cardiologists at the Cleveland Clinic, any number of whom are closet believers in what I do, but they're a little afraid because of the power structure." For S, however, it has been impossible to avoid his share of frustration. Early on, when he was first suggesting dietary treatment of heart disease, colleagues greeted the idea with caution. S figured that their attitude was born out of the fact that scientific research showing effective dietary intervention of heart disease in humans wasn't yet strong enough. But later, scientific results of unparalleled success, including Esselstyn's, were published. The data have been strong, consistent and deep, yet S still encountered reluctance to embrace this idea. You take a cardiologist and he's learned all about beta blockers, he's learned about calcium antagonists, he's learned about how to run this catheter up into your heart and blow up balloons or laser it or stent it without killing you, and it's very sophisticated. And there's all these nurses and there's lights out and there's drama. I mean, it's just, oh my God, the doctor blows up the balloon in his head. The ego of these people is enormous. And then someone comes along and says, "You know, I think we can cure this with Brussels sprouts and broccoli." 326. The China study. Coley. The doctor's response is, "What? I learned all this crap. I'm making a freaking fortune, and you want to take it all away?" Then when that person comes along and actually cures patients with Brussels sprouts and broccoli, as Esselstyn did, and gets better results than any other pill or procedure known, you've suddenly announced that something works, hands down, better than what 99% of the profession is doing. Summarizing his point, S says, cardiologists are supposed to be expert in diseases of the heart, and yet they have no expertise in treating heart disease, and when that awareness strikes them, they get very defensive. They can treat the symptoms, they can take care of arrhythmias, they can get you interventions, but they don't know how to treat the disease, which is a nutritional treatment. Imagine a dietitian training a heart surgeon. Esselstyn has found that merely saying that patients can have control over their own health is a challenge to many. These experts, after all, are built up to be the dispensers of health and healing. Intellectually, it's very challenging to think that the patient can do this with greater alacrity, dispatch, safety, and it's something that's going to endure. With all of the doctor's gadgets, technologies, training, and knowledge, nothing is more effective than guiding the patient to make the right lifestyle choices. But S is quick to point out that doctors are not malicious people engaged in a conspiracy. The only person that likes change is a newborn, and it's natural. It's human nature. Anywhere you go, 99% of the people are eating incorrectly. The numbers are against you, and it's very hard for those 99% to look at you in the 1% and say, yes, he's right, we are all wrong. Another obstacle, lack of nutrition knowledge amongst physicians. S has had his share of interaction with ignorant doctors, and his impression is that it's absolutely daunting, the lack of physician knowledge that there is about the fact that disease can be reversed. You wonder, what is the literature that these guys read? Physician knowledge often involves only the standard treatments, pills and procedures. What does the 20th century of medicine, big medicine, whose health are they protecting? 327 have to offer? We have pills and we have procedures. Right? Esselstyn leans forward and, with a slight grin, as if he's about to tell us the emperor has no clothes, he says, but whoever says, maybe we ought to stop disease? In Dr. Esselstyn's experience, stopping disease does not figure prominently into the status quo. Lack of training. The medical status quo relies heavily on medication and surgery, at the exclusion of nutrition and lifestyle. Doctors have virtually no training in nutrition and how it relates to health. In 1985, the United States National Research Council funded an expert panel report that investigated the quantity and quality of nutrition education in U.S. medical schools. Point 4. The committee's findings were clear. The committee concluded that nutrition education programs in U.S. medical schools are largely inadequate to meet the present and future demands of the medical profession. But this finding was nothing new. The committee noted that in 1961, the American Medical Association Council on Foods and Nutrition reported that nutrition in the U.S. medical schools received inadequate recognition, support, and attention. 4.5 In other words, over 40 years ago, the doctors themselves said that their nutrition training was inadequate. Nothing had changed by 1985, and up to the present time, articles continue to be written documenting the lack of nutrition training in medical schools. Point 67. This situation is dangerous. Nutrition training of doctors is not merely inadequate, it is practically non-existent. In 1985, the National Research Council report found that physicians receive, on average, only 21 classroom hours, about 2 credits of nutrition training during their 4 years of medical SHU. 1.4 The majority of the schools surveyed actually taught less than 20 contact hours of nutrition, or 1 to 2 credit hours. By comparison, an undergraduate nutrition major at Cornell will receive 25 to 40 credit hours of instruction, or about 250 to 500 contact hours. Registered dietitians will have more than 500 contact hours. It gets worse. The bulk of these nutrition hours are taught in the first year of medical school, as part of other basic science courses. Topics covered in a basic biochemistry course may include nutrient metabolism and or biochemical reactions involving certain vitamins or minerals. In other words, nutrition is often not taught in relation to public health problems, like obesity, cancer, diabetes, etc. In conjunction with the 1985 328 the HENA study government report, the president of the American Medical Students Association, William Kassler, writes most nutrition in the formal curriculum is incorporated into other courses. Biochemistry, physiology, and pharmacology are the courses most often alleged to contain some nutrition instruction. Too often in such courses, nutrition is touched on briefly, with the primary emphasis on the major discipline. It is quite possible to finish such a course and not even realize that nutrition was covered. My emphasis on nutrition taught by those whose interest and expertise lie elsewhere simply doesn't work. It gets even worse. When nutrition education is provided in relation to public health problems, guess who is supplying the educational material? The Dannon Institute, Egg Nutrition Board, National Cattlemen's Beef Association, National Dairy Council, Nestle Clinical Nutrition, Wyeth Ayers Laboratories, Bristol Myers Squibb Company, Baxter Healthcare Corporation and others have all joined forces to produce a nutrition in medicine program and the medical nutrition curriculum initiative. 9. 1. Do you think that this all-star team of animal foods and drug industries representatives is going to objectively judge and promote optimal nutrition, which science has shown to be a whole foods, plant-based diet that minimizes the need for drugs? Or might they try to protect the meat-centered, Western diet where everyone expects to pop a pill for every sickness? This organization is creating nutrition curricula involving CD-ROMs and giving them away to medical schools for free. As of late 2003, 112 medical schools were using the curriculum.ll. According to their website, plans are underway for developing versions for undergraduate nutrition students, continuing medical education and other health professions audiences. http://www.med.unc.edu/NMLFAQ.htm #anchor 197343. The dairy industry has also funded research investigations into nutrition education in medical schools. 12 and has funded prestigious awards. 13. 14. These efforts show that industry is well prepared to promote its monetary interests whenever the opportunity presents itself. You should not assume that your doctor has any more knowledge about food and its relation to health than your neighbors and co-workers. It's a situation in which nutritionally untrained doctors prescribe milk and sugar-based meal replacement shakes for overweight diabetics, high meat, high-fat diets for patients who ask how to lose weight. Big medicine, whose health are they protecting? 329. And extra milk for patients who have osteoporosis. The health damage that results from doctors' ignorance of nutrition is astounding. Apparently, there aren't enough nutrition-oriented physician role models in medical education. A recent survey found a shortage of nutrition-oriented physician role models is probably the major constraint in teaching nutrition to residents. 12. I suspect that these medical programs lack nutrition-oriented physicians simply because they do not make it a priority to hire them. Nobody knows this better than Dr. John McDougall. Dr. McDougall's challenge. Dr. John McDougall has been advocating a whole foods, plant-based approach to health longer than any practitioner I know. He has written 10 books, including several that have sold over 500,000 copies each. His nutrition and health knowledge is phenomenal, greater than any other doctor I've met and greater than any of my nutrition colleagues in academia. We met recently in his Northern California home, and one of the first things he showed me was his bank of 4 or 5 full-size metal file cabinets lined up along the back of his study. There can't be many people in the country with a collection of scientific literature on diet and disease that could rival John McDougall's, and, most importantly, John maintains a high level of familiarity with all of it. It is not unusual for him to spend a couple of hours a day on the internet reviewing the latest journal articles. If anybody would be a perfect nutrition-oriented physician role model in an educational setting, it would be Dr. John McDougall. Growing up, John ate a rich, Western diet. As he says, he had 4 feasts a day: Easter during breakfast, Thanksgiving at lunch, Christmas at dinner, and a birthday party for dessert. It caught up to him, and at the age of 18, a few months into college, John had a stroke. After recovering with a new appreciation for life, he became a straight-A student as an undergraduate and then completed medical school in Michigan and an internship in Hawaii. He chose to practice on the Big Island of Hawaii, where he cared for thousands of patients, some of whom had recently migrated from China or the Philippines, and some who were fourth-generation Chinese or Filipino Americans. It was there that John became an unhappy doctor. Many of his patients' health problems were a result of chronic illnesses, such as obesity, diabetes, cancer, heart disease, and arthritis. John would treat them as he was taught, with the standard sets of pills and procedures, but very 330 the China study. Few of them became healthy. Their chronic diseases didn't go away, and John quickly realized that he had severe limitations as a doctor. He also started to learn something else from his patients, the first and second generation Americans from Asia, the ones who ate more traditional Asian staple diets of rice and vegetables, were trim, fit, and not afflicted with the chronic diseases that plagued John's other patients. The third and fourth generation Asian Americans, however, had fully adopted America's eating habits and suffered from obesity, diabetes, and a whole host of other chronic diseases. It was from these people that John began to notice how important diet was for health. Because John wasn't healing people, and the pills and procedures weren't working, he decided he needed more education and entered a graduate medical program, residency, at the Queen's Medical Center in Honolulu. It was there that he began to understand the boundaries that the medical establishment had set and the way that medical education molds the way doctors are supposed to think. John went into the program hoping to find out how to perfect the pills and procedures so that he could become a better doctor. But after observing experienced doctors treating their patients with pills and procedures, he realized that these authoritative doctors didn't do any better than he did. Their patients didn't just stay sick, they got worse. John realized something was wrong with the system, not him. So he began to read the scientific literature. Like Dr. Esselstyn, once he started reading the literature, John became convinced that a whole foods, plant-based diet had the potential not only to prevent these diseases that were plaguing patients, but also the potential to treat them. This idea, he was to find out, was not received kindly by his teachers and colleagues. In this environment, diet was considered quackery. John would ask, "Doesn't diet have something to do with heart disease?" And his colleagues would tell him that the science was controversial. John continued to read the scientific research and to talk to his colleagues and only became even more baffled. When I looked at the literature, I couldn't find the controversy. It was absolutely clear what the literature said. Through those years, John came to understand why so many physicians claimed diet was controversial. The scientist is sitting down at the breakfast table, and in the one hand he has a paper that says that cholesterol will rot your arteries and kill you, and in the other hand he has a fork shoveling bacon and eggs into his mouth, and he says, "There's big medicine, whose health are they protecting?" 331. Something confusing here. I'm confused. And that's the controversy. That's all it is. John tells a story about seeing a 38-year-old man and his wife after the man had suffered a second heart attack. As the attending resident, not their primary physician, he asked the patient what he was going to do to prevent a third fatal heart attack. "You're 38 years old with a beautiful young wife, 5 kids. What are you going to do to keep your wife from being a widow and your kids from becoming fatherless?" The man was despondent, frustrated, and said, "There's nothing one can do. One don't drink. One don't smoke. One exercise. One follow the same diet the dietitian gave me after my last heart attack. There's nothing more one can do." John told the couple what he had been learning about diet. He suggested that the man might reverse his disease if he ate the right way. The patient and his wife received the news with enthusiasm. John talked with them for quite a long time, left the room, and felt great. He had finally helped someone. He had finally done his job. That lasted for about 2 hours. He was called into the chief of medicine's office. The chief of medicine wields absolute authority over the residents. If he fires a resident, not only is that person out of his or her job, that person is out of his or her career. The excited couple had told their primary physician what they had just learned. The doctor replied that what they had been told wasn't true, and promptly reported John to the chief of medicine. The chief of medicine had a serious conversation with John, who remembers being told that I was stepping far beyond my duties as a resident. One should get serious about medicine and give up all this nonsense about food having anything to do with disease. The chief of medicine made it clear that on this point, John's job, and his subsequent career, was on the line. So John bit his tongue for the rest of his education. On the day of John's graduation, he and the chief of medicine had a final talk. John remembers the man as being smart, with a good heart. But he was too entrenched in the status quo. The chief of medicine sat him down and said, "John, one think you're a good doctor. I want you to know that. I want you to know that I like your family. That's why I'm going to tell you this. I'm concerned that you're going to starve to death. With all your crazy ideas about food, all you're going to do is collect a bunch of bums and hippies." 332. The China study. John paused to gather his thoughts, and then said, "That may be the case. Then I'll have to starve. I can't put people on drugs or surgeries. That don't work. Besides, I think you're wrong. I don't think it will be bums and hippies. I think it will be successful people who have done well in life. They'll ask themselves, I'm such a big success, so how come I'm so fat? With that, John looked at the chief's generous belly, and continued, they'll ask, if I'm such a big success, why are my health and my future out of control? They'll look at what I have to say, and they're going to buy it. John finished his formal medical education having had only 1 hour of nutrition instruction, which involved learning which infant formulas to use. His experience confirms every study that has found nutrition training among physicians to be sorely inadequate. Hooked on drugs. John touched on another important area where the medical profession has lost credibility, its ties with the drug industry. Medical education and drug companies are in bed together, and have been for quite some time. John talked some about the depth of the problem and how the educational system has been corrupted. He said, the problem with doctors starts with our education. The whole system is paid for by the drug industry, from education to research. The drug industry has bought the minds of the medical profession. It starts the day you enter medical school. All the way through medical school, everything is supported by the drug industry. John is not alone in criticizing the way in which the medical establishment has partnered with the drug industry. Many prominent scientists have published scathing observations showing how corrupt the system has become. Among the common observations are: the drug industry ingratiates itself with medical students with free gifts, including meals, entertainment, and travel, educational events, including lectures, which are little more than drug advertisements, and conferences, which include speakers who are little more than drug spokespeople. 17. Graduate medical students, physician residents, and other physicians actually change their prescribing habits because of information provided by drug salespeople, 18 to 20, even though this information. Big medicine, whose health are they protecting? 333. Is known to be overly positive and prescribing habits are less appropriate as a result. 17, 21, 22. Research and academic medicine merely carry out the pharmaceutical industry's bidding. This can happen because the drug companies, and not researchers, may design the research, which allows the company to rig the study. 23, 24. The researchers may have a direct financial stake in the drug company whose product they are studying. 5,25. The drug company may be responsible for collecting and collating the raw data, and then only selectively allowing researchers to view the data. 26. The drug company may retain veto power over whether the findings are published, and may retain editorial rights over any scientific publications resulting from the research. 25, 27. The drug company may hire a communications firm to write the scientific article, and then find researchers willing to attach their names as authors of the paper after it has already been written. 26. The major scientific journals have turned into little more than marketing vehicles for drug companies. The leading medical journals derive their primary income from drug advertising. This advertising is not adequately reviewed by the journal, and companies often present misleading claims about drugs. Perhaps more disconcerting, the majority of clinical trial research reported in the journals is funded by drug company money, and the financial interests of the researchers involved are not fully acknowledged. 24. In the past couple of years there have been well-publicized scandals at major medical centers that confirm these charges. In one instance, a scientist's integrity was maligned in a variety of ways by both a drug company and her university administration after she found that a drug under study had strong side effects and it lost its effectiveness. 27 In another case, a scientist speaking out about the possible side effects of antidepressants lost a job opportunity at the University of Toronto. 26 The examples go on and on. Dr. Marcia Angel, an ex-editor of the New England Journal of Medicine, wrote a scathing editorial called "Is Academic Medicine for Sale?" 15. The ties between clinical researchers and industry include not only grant support, but also a host of other financial arrangements. Researchers serve as consultants to companies whose products they are studying, join advisory boards and speakers bureaus. 334 The HENA study. Enter into patent and royalty arrangements, agree to be the listed authors of articles, go straight by interested companies, promote drugs and devices at company-sponsored symposiums and allow themselves to be plied with expensive gifts and trips to luxurious settings. Many also have equity interest in the companies. Dr. Angel goes on to say that these financial associations often significantly bias research, both the kind of work that is done and the way it is reported. Even more dangerous than the threat of fraudulent findings is the fact that the only type of research that is funded and recognized is research on drugs. Research on the causes of disease and non-drug intervention simply doesn't occur in medical education settings. 4. Example, academic researchers may be furiously trying to find a pill that will treat the symptoms of obesity, but not be devoting any time or money to teaching people how to live a healthier life. Dr. Angel writes 15. In terms of education, medical students and house officers, under the constant tutelage of industry representatives, learn to rely on drugs and devices more than they probably should. My emphasis. As the critics of medicine so often charge, young physicians learn that for every problem, there is a pill, my emphasis, and a drug company representative to explain it. They also become accustomed to receiving gifts and favors from an industry that uses these courtesies to influence their continuing education. The academic medical centers, in allowing themselves to become research outposts for industry, contribute to the overemphasis on drugs and devices. In this environment, is it possible for nutrition to be given fair and honest consideration? Despite the fact that our leading killers can be prevented and even reversed using good nutrition, will you ever hear about it from your doctor? Not as long as this environment persists in our medical schools and hospitals. Not unless your doctor has decided that standard medical practice as it is taught does not work, and decides to spend a significant amount of time educating himself or herself about good nutrition. This takes a rare individual. The situation has gotten so bad that Dr. John McDougall said, "I don't know what to believe anymore. When I read a paper that says big me 0 INE, who ICEALTHR the Y pro TECT in G. 335. Should be giving my heart patients beta blockers and ACE inhibitors. 2 classes of heart drugs. I don't know whether it's true. I honestly don't know if it's true because drug research is so tainted." Do you think the following headlines are related? Schools report research interest conflicts between drug companies and researchers. 28. Prescription use by children multiplying, study says. 29. Survey, many guidelines written by doctors with ties to companies. 30. Correctly prescribed drugs take heavy toll, Millions affected by toxic reactions. 3L. We pay a high price for allowing these medical biases. A recent study found that 1 in 5 new drugs will either get a black box warning, indicating a previously unknown serious adverse reaction that may result in death or serious injury, or will be withdrawn from the market. Within 25 years, 30–20% of all new drugs have serious unknown side effects, and more than 100,000 Americans die every year from correctly taking their properly prescribed medication. 3. This is one of the leading causes of death in America. Dr. McDougall's fate. When Dr. John McDougall finished his formal medical education, he set up a practice on the Hawaiian island of Oahu. He began writing books about nutrition and health and established a national reputation. In the mid-1980s, John was contacted by St. Helena Hospital in Napa Valley, California, and asked if he would accept a position running its health center. The hospital was a Seventh-day Adventist hospital, if you recall. From Chapter 7, the Seventh-day Adventists encourage followers to eat a vegetarian diet, even though they consume higher than average amounts of dairy products. It was an opportunity too good to pass up. And John left Hawaii and headed for California. John had a good home at St. Helena for a number of years. He taught nutrition and used nutrition to treat sick patients, which he did with fantastic success. He treated over 2,000 very sick patients, and over the course of 16 years, he has never been sued or even had a letter of complaint. Perhaps more importantly, John saw these patients get well. Throughout this time, he continued his publishing activity, maintaining a national reputation. But as time passed, he realized that things weren't quite the same as when he first arrived. His discontent was growing. 336. The China study. Of those later years, he says, I just didn't think I was going anyplace. The program had 150 or 170 people a year, and that was it. Never grew. Wasn't getting any support from the hospital, and we had gone through a lot of administrators. He had small clashes with the other doctors at the hospital. At one point, the heart department objected to what John was doing with heart patients. John told them, I'll tell you what, I'll send every one of my heart patients to you for a second opinion if you'll send yours to me. It was quite an offer, but they didn't accept it. On another occasion, John had referred a patient to a cardiologist, and the cardiologist incorrectly told the patient that he needed to have bypass surgery. After a couple of these incidents, John had reached the limit of his patience. Finally, after the cardiologist recommended surgery for another one of John's patients, John called him and said, I want to talk with you and the patient about this. I would like to discuss the scientific literature that causes you to make this recommendation. The cardiologist said that he wouldn't do that, to which John responded, why not? You just recommended that this guy have his heart opened, and you're going to charge him $50,000 or $100,000 for it? Why don't we discuss it? Don't you think that's fair to the patient? The cardiologist declined, saying that it would just confuse the patient. That was the last time he recommended heart surgery for one of John's patients. Meanwhile, none of the other physicians in the hospital had ever referred a patient to John. Not once. Other physicians would send their own wives and children to see him, but they would never refer a patient. The reason, according to John, They were worried about what would happen when their patients would come to see me, and it happened all the time when patients would come on their own. They'd come to me with heart disease or high blood pressure or diabetes. I'd put them on the diet, and they'd go back off all their pills, and soon their numbers would be normal. They'd go to their doctor and say, "Why the hell didn't you tell me about this before? Why did you let me suffer, spend all this money, almost die, when all I had to do was eat oatmeal?" The doctors didn't want to hear this. There were other moments of friction between John and the hospital, but the last straw involved the Dr. Roy Swank multiple sclerosis program mentioned in Chapter 9. Big Medicine, whose health are they protecting? 337. John had contacted Dr. Swank when he learned that Swank was about to retire. John had known and respected Dr. Roy Swank for a long time, and he offered to take over the Swank multiple sclerosis program and merge it with his health clinic at St. Helena Hospital, preserving it in honor of Dr. Swank. Dr. Swank agreed, much to John's excitement. As John said, there were 4 reasons that this would be a perfect fit for St. Helena's. It fit in with the philosophy of the Adventists, dietary treatment of disease. They would be helping people who desperately needed their help. It would double their patient census, helping to grow the program. It would cost almost nothing. In thinking back on it, John said, "Could you think of any reason not to do this?" It was obvious. So he took the proposal to the head of his department. After listening, she said that she didn't think the hospital wanted to do this. She said, "Well, I don't think we really want to introduce any new programs right now." John, dumbfounded, asked her, "Please tell me why. What does it mean to be a hospital? Why are we here? I thought we were here to take care of sick people." Her response was a doozy. "Well, you know we are, but you know, MS patients are not really desirable patients. You told me yourself that most neurologists don't like to take care of MS patients." John could not believe what he had just heard. In a very tense moment, he said, "Wait a minute. I'm a doctor. This is a hospital. As far as one know, our job is to relieve the suffering of the sick. These are sick people. Just because other doctors can't help them in their suffering doesn't mean that we can't. Here's the evidence that says we can. I have an effective treatment for people who need my care, and this is a hospital. Will you explain to me why we don't want to take care of those kinds of patients?" He continued, "I want to talk to the head of the hospital. I want to explain to her why one need this program and why the hospital needs this program, and why the patients need this program. I want you to get me an appointment." 338. The China study. Ultimately, though, the head of the hospital proved to be just as difficult. John reflected on the situation with his wife. He was supposed to renew his contract with the hospital in a couple of weeks, and he decided not to do it. He left on cordial terms, and to this day he does not hold personal grudges. He just explains it by saying that their directions in life were different. John would prefer to remember St. Helena for what it was, a good home to him for 16 years, but a place nonetheless that was just into that whole drug money thing. Now Lone runs a highly successful lifestyle medicine program with his family's help, writes a popular newsletter that he makes freely available, http://www.dreamdougal.com, organizes group trips with past patients and new friends, and has more time to go windsurfing when the wind picks up on Bodega Bay. This is a man with a wealth of knowledge and qualifications, who could benefit the health of millions of Americans. He has never been challenged by any of his colleagues for physician misbehavior, and yet the medical establishment does not want his services. He is reminded of this fact all the time. Patients will come in with rheumatoid arthritis. They'll be in wheelchairs, they can't even turn the key on their car. And I'll take care of them, and 3 or 4 weeks later, they'll go back to see their doctor. They'll walk up to their doctor, grab their hand, and shake it hard. Doctor will say, "Wonderful." The patient, all excited, will say, "Well, I want to tell you what I did. I went to see this Dr. McDougall, I changed my diet, and now my arthritis is gone." Their doctor simply responds, "Oh my goodness. That's great. Whatever you're doing, just keep doing it. I'll see you later." That's always the response. It's not, "Please, my God, tell me what you did so I can tell the next patient." It's, "Whatever you're doing. That's just great." If the patient starts to tell them they change to a vegetarian diet, the doctor will cut in with, "Yeah, okay, fine, you're really a strong person. Thanks a lot. See you later." Get them out of the office as quickly as they can. It's very threatening, very threatening. Esselstyn's reward. Back in Ohio, Dr. Esselstyn retired from active surgery in June of 2000 and assumed the position of preventive cardiology consultant in the Department of General Surgery at the Cleveland Clinic. He has continued. Big medicine, whose health are they protecting? 339. To do research and to visit with patients. He holds 3-hour counseling sessions in his home with new heart disease patients, gives them research evidence, and provides a delicious heart-safe meal. In addition, he gives talks around the country and abroad. In March of 2002, S and his wife N, whose grandfather founded the Cleveland Clinic, drafted a letter to the head of the cardiology department and the head of the hospital at the Cleveland Clinic. The letter started off by saying how proud they were of the reputation and excellence of the clinic and the innovation of the surgical procedures, but that everyone recognized that surgery was never going to be the answer to this epidemic of heart disease. S formally proposed the idea that he could help set up an arrest and reversal dietary program in the Department of Preventive Cardiology at the Cleveland Clinic. The program would mirror his own and could be administered by nurse clinicians and physician assistants. Ideally, a young physician with passion for the idea would head the program. Ultimately, every patient with heart disease at the clinic would be offered the option of arrest and reversal therapy using dietary means, which costs very little, harbors no risks, and puts the control back into the patient's hands. You'd think that if an opportunity arose to profoundly heal sick people, and one of the most reputable people in the country was going to help you, a hospital would jump at the opportunity. But after being one of the star surgeons at the Cleveland Clinic for decades, after initiating a heart reversal study that had greater success than anything ever done at the clinic, and after graciously offering a plan to help heal even more people, neither the head of the hospital nor the department head had the respect to even acknowledge that S had written to them. They didn't call. They didn't write. They completely ignored him. 7 weeks passed, and finally S called the department head and the hospital head, and neither of them would take his call. Finally, after 7 calls, the head of the hospital got on the phone. This man had praised S for years for his research and seemed excited by his results. But now he was singing a different tune. He obviously knew exactly what S was calling about, and told S that the head of the cardiology department didn't want to do it. In other words, he just passed the buck. If the head of the hospital wanted it to be done, it would be done, regardless of what the head of cardiology wanted. So S called the head of cardiology, who finally took his call. The man was abrasive and rude. He made it clear he had no interest in what S was trying to do. 340 The China study. S hasn't talked to either of these doctors since, but he still has hope that he can change their minds as more and more research supports what he has been saying. Meanwhile, many people at the clinic are still excited about S's work. Many of them want to see a wider application of his program, but the powers that be will not let it happen. They get frustrated, and S is frustrated because the current program in preventive cardiology is a disaster. They still eat meat, they still eat dairy, and they don't have any cholesterol goal. It's all just so vague. Preventive cardiology takes great pride when they are able to slow the rate of progression of this disease. This isn't cancer, for God's sake. An interesting situation is now developing. Just as with Dr. McDougall, many of the clinic bigwigs with heart disease have themselves gone to Esselstyn for treatment and lifestyle counseling. They know it works, and they seek out the program on their own. As S says, this could be developing into a very interesting crisis. One have now treated a number of senior staff with coronary disease at the clinic, senior staff physicians. I have also treated a number of senior staff trustees. One of the trustees knows about the frustrations that we've had trying to get this into the clinic, and he says, I think, if the word gets out that Esselstyn has this treatment that arrests and reverses this disease at the Cleveland Clinic, and it's been used by senior staff and he's treated senior trustees, but he's not permitted to treat the common herd, we could be open for a lawsuit. For the time being, S, with his wife's help, will continue to run counseling sessions out of his own home because the institution to which he gave the greater part of his life does not want to endorse a dietary approach that competes with its standard menu of pills and procedures. This past summer, S spent much more time than usual at his upstate New York farm, making hay. As much as S likes a more relaxed life, he would also love to continue to help diseased people get better with the aid of the Cleveland Clinic. But they won't allow him to. As far as I am concerned, this is nothing short of criminal. We, the public, turn to doctors and hospitals in times of great need for them to provide care that is knowingly less than optimal, that doesn't protect our health, doesn't heal our disease, and costs us tens of thousands of dollars is morally inexcusable. S sums up the situation. Big Med I-N-E, who S-E-H-E-A-L-T-H are they pro-T-E-C-T-I-N-G. 341. The clinic is now injecting stem cells to try to make new heart vessels grow. Wouldn't it be easier to stop the disease? It's appalling, isn't it? It's just so grippingly unbelievable to think that we're being led around by people who refuse to believe the obvious. Both Esselstyn and McDougall have now been denied re-entry into the establishment, after headline-making success at healing people with a nutritional approach. You can focus on the money, according to John and S, 80% of St. Helena's and 65% of the Cleveland Clinic's respective income Incomes were generated by traditional heart disease treatments, surgical interventions, but it's something more than just money. It may also be the intellectual threat that the patient should be in control, and not the doctor, that something as simple as food could be more powerful than all the knowledge of pills and high-tech procedures. It may be the lack of credible nutrition education in medical school. It may be the influence of the drug industry. Whatever it is, it has become clear that the medical industry in this country is not protecting our health as it should. As McDougall reaches his arms out, palms up, and scrunches his shoulders up, he simply says, "It's beyond comprehension." Repeating histories. In 1985, when I was on sabbatical in Oxford, England, I had the opportunity to study the history of diet and disease at some of the great medical history libraries in the Western world. I made use of the famous Bodleian Library in Oxford and the London libraries of the Royal College of Surgeons and the Imperial Cancer Research Fund. In the quiet recesses of these marble-lined sanctuaries, I was thrilled to find authors who wrote eloquently on the topic of diet and cancer, among other diseases, over 150 years ago. One such author was George Maselwain, who wrote 14 books on medicine and health. Maselwain was born and raised in Northern Ireland. He later moved to London, where he became a prominent surgeon in the early 1800s. He was to become a member, and later, an honorary fellow, of the Royal College of Surgeons. He became vegetarian at the age of 40, after identifying grease, fat, and alcohol as being the chief causes of cancer. L. Maselwain also popularized the theory of the constitutional nature of disease, mostly in reference to the origins and treatment of cancer. The constitutional nature of disease concept meant that disease is not the result of one organ, one cell, or one reaction gone awry, or the result of one external cause acting independently. It is the result of multiple systems throughout the body breaking down. Opposing this view was the local theory of disease, which said that disease is caused by a single external agent acting at a specific site in the body. At that time, a fierce fight was underway between those who believed in diet and those who 344 The China study supported surgery and the emerging use of drugs. The local disease proponents argued that disease was locally caused and could be cut out or locally treated with isolated chemicals. In contrast, those who favored diet and lifestyle believed that disease was a symptom resulting from the constitutional characteristics of the whole body. I was impressed that these old books contained the same ideas about diet and disease that had resurfaced in the health battles of the I-980s. As I learned more about Maselwain, I came to realize that he was a relative of mine. My paternal grandmother's maiden name was Maselwain, and that branch of the family had lived in the same part of Northern Ireland that George Maselwain had come from. Furthermore, there were family stories about a famous Maselwain who had left the family farm in Ireland to become a very well-known doctor in London in the early 1800s. My father, who had emigrated from Northern Ireland, had referred to an uncle George when I was young, but I never was aware of who this man was. Through further genealogical research, I have come to the near certain conclusion that George Maselwain was my great-great-uncle. This discovery has been one of the more remarkable stories of my life. My wife Karen says, if there's such a thing as reincarnation. I agree. If I ever lived a past life, it was as George Maselwain. He and I had similar careers. Both of us became acutely aware of the importance of diet in disease, and both of us became vegetarian. Some of his ideas written over 150 years ago, were so close to what I believed that I felt. They could have come from my own mouth. I discovered more than my family history while reading in these august, history-laden libraries. I found out that scholars have been arguing over the nature of health for centuries, even millennia. Almost 2,500 years ago, Plato wrote a dialogue between two characters, Socrates and Glaucon, in which they discuss the future of their cities. Socrates says, "The cities should be simple, and the citizens should subsist on barley and wheat, with relishes of salt, olives, cheese, and country fare of boiled onions and cabbage, with desserts of figs, peas, beans, roasted myrtle berries and beech nuts, and wine in moderation." 2 Socrates says, "And thus, passing their days in tranquility and sound health, they will, in all probability, live to an advanced age." But Glaucon replies that such a diet would only be appropriate for a community of swine, and that the citizens should live in a civilized manner. He continues, they ought to recline on couches, and have the usual dishes and dessert of a modem dinner. In other words, the repeating histories 345 citizens should have the luxury of eating meat. Socrates replies, "If you wish us also to contemplate a city that is suffering from inflammation, we shall also need great quantities of all kinds of cattle for those who may wish to eat them, shall we not?" Glaucon says, "Of course we shall." Socrates then says, "Then shall we not experience the need of medical men also to a much greater extent under this than under the former regime?" Glaucon can't deny it. "Yes, indeed," he says. Socrates goes on to say that this luxurious city will be short of land because of the extra acreage required to raise animals for food. This shortage will lead the citizens to take land from others, which could precipitate violence and war, thus a need for justice. Furthermore, Socrates writes, when dissoluteness and diseases abound in a city, are not law courts and surgeries opened in abundance, and do not law and physic begin to hold their heads high, when numbers even of well-born persons devote themselves with eagerness to these professions? In other words, in this luxurious city of sickness and disease, lawyers and doctors will become the norm. 2. Plato, in this passage, made it perfectly clear, we shall eat animals only at our own peril. Though it is indeed remarkable that one of the greatest intellectuals in the history of the Western world condemned meat eating almost 2,500 years ago, I find it even more remarkable that few know about this history. Hardly anybody knows, for example, that the father of Western medicine, Hippocrates, advocated diet as the chief way to prevent and treat disease, or that George Maselwain knew that diet was the way to prevent and treat disease, or that the man instrumental in founding the American Cancer Society, Frederick L. Hoffman, knew that diet was the way to prevent and treat disease. How did Plato predict the future so accurately? He knew that consuming animal foods would not lead to true health and prosperity. Instead, the false sense of rich luxury granted by being able to eat animals would only lead to a culture of sickness, disease, land disputes, lawyers, and doctors. This is a pretty good description of some of the challenges faced by modern America. How did Seneca, one of the great scholars 2,000 years ago, a tutor and advisor to Roman Emperor Nero, know with such certainty the trouble with consuming animals when he wrote to an ox is satisfied with the pasture of an acre or two, one wood suffices for several elephants. Man alone supports himself by the 346 The China Study. Pillage of the whole earth and sea. What Has nature indeed given us so insatiable a stomach, while she has given us so insignificant bodies? The slaves of the belly, as says Sallust, are to be counted in the number of the lower animals, not of men. Nay, not of them, but rather of the dead. You might inscribe on their doors, these have anticipated death. How did George Maselwain predict the future when he said that the local theory of disease would not lead to health? Even today, we don't have any pills or procedures that effectively prevent, eliminate, or even treat the causes of any chronic diseases. The most promising preventions and treatments have now been shown to be diet and lifestyle changes, a constitutional approach to health. How did we forget these lessons from the past? How did we go from knowing that the best athletes in the ancient Greek Olympics must consume a plant-based diet to fearing that vegetarians don't get enough protein? How did we get to a place where the healers of our society are doctors, know little, if anything, about nutrition, where our medical institutions denigrate the subject, where using prescription drugs and going to hospitals is the third leading cause of death? How did we get to a place where advocating a plant-based diet can jeopardize a professional career, where scientists spend more time mastering nature than respecting it? How did we get to a place where the companies that profit from our sickness are the ones telling us how to be healthy, where the companies that profit from our food choices are the ones telling us what to eat, where the public's hard-earned money is being spent by the government to boost the drug industry's profits, and where there is more distrust than trust of our government's policies on foods, drugs, and health? How did we get to a place where Americans are so confused about what is healthy that they no longer care? Our country's population, which numbers almost 300 million people, is sick. 82% of American adults have at least one risk factor for heart disease. 81% of Americans take at least one medication during any given week. 50% of Americans take at least one prescription drug during any given week. 65% of American adults are overweight. 6. Repeating histories 347. 31% of American adults are obese. 6. Roughly 1 in 3 youths in America, ages 6 to 19, is already overweight or at risk of becoming overweight. About 105 million American adults have dangerously high cholesterol level 7, defined as 200 mg LDL or higher. Heart-safe cholesterol level is under 150 mg LDL. About 50 million Americans have high blood pressures. Over 63 million American adults have pain in the lower back, considerably related to circulation and excess body weight, both influenced by diet and aggravated by physical inactivity, during any given 3-month period. 9. Over 33 million American adults have a migraine or severe headache during any given 3-month period. 9. 23 million Americans had heart disease. Indiana, 20019. At least 16 million Americans have diabetes. Over 700,000 Americans died from heart disease in 2000. Over 550,000 Americans died from cancer in 2000. Over 280,000 Americans died from cerebrovascular diseases, stroke, diabetes, or Alzheimer's in 2000. At the great peril of ignoring the warnings of Plato and others, America has, in the words of Seneca, anticipated death. Starvation, poor sanitation, and communicable diseases, symbols of impoverishment, have been largely minimized in the Western world. Now we have an urgency of excess, and some of the previously less developed countries are racing to get where we are. Never before have such large percentages of the population died from diseases of affluence. Is this the affluence that Socrates predicted 2,500 years ago, a society full of doctors and lawyers wrestling with the problems caused by people living luxuriously and eating cattle? Never before have so many people suffered such high levels of obesity and diabetes. Never before has the financial strain of healthcare distressed every sector of our society, from business to education to government to everyday families with inadequate insurance. If we have to decide between health insurance for our teachers and textbooks for our kids, which will we choose? Never before have we affected the natural environment to such an extent that we are losing our topsoil, our massive North American aquifers, and our world's rainforests. Lo, we are changing our climate so rapidly that many of the world's best informed scientists fear the future. Never before. 348 The China Study. Have we been eliminating plant and animal species from the face of the earth as we are doing now? Never before have we introduced, on such a large scale, genetically altered varieties of plants into the environment, without knowing what the repercussions will be. All of these changes in our environment are strongly affected by what we choose to eat. 2. As the billions of people in the developing world are accumulating more wealth and adopting the Western diet and lifestyle, problems created by nutritional excess are becoming exponentially more urgent with each passing year. In 1997, the Director General of the World Health Organization, Dr. Hiroshi Nakajima, referred to the future chronic disease burden in developing countries as a crisis of suffering on a global scale. 12. We've fumbled around for the past 2,500 years, building up the unsustainable behemoth that we now call modern society. We certainly won't have another 2,500 years to remember the teachings of Plato, Pythagoras, Seneca, and Macelwane. We won't even have 250 years. From this urgency arises great opportunity, and because of that I am filled with hope. People are beginning to sense the need for change and are beginning to question some of the most basic assumptions that we have about food and health. People are beginning to understand the conclusions of scientific literature and are changing their lives for the better. Never before has there been such a mountain of empirical research supporting a whole foods, plant-based diet. Now, for example, we can obtain images of the arteries in the heart, and then show conclusively, as Drs. Dean Ornish and Caldwell Esselstyn Jr. have done, that a whole foods, plant-based diet reverses heart disease. 13. We now have the knowledge to understand how this actually works. Animal protein, even more than saturated fat and dietary cholesterol, raises blood cholesterol levels. In experimental animals, individual humans, and entire populations. International comparisons between countries show that populations subsisting on traditional plant-based diets have far less heart disease, and studies of individuals within single populations show that those who eat more whole, plant-based foods not only have lower cholesterol levels, but have less heart disease. We now have a deep and broad range of evidence showing that a whole foods, plant-based diet is best for the heart. Never before have we had such a depth of understanding of how diet affects cancer both on a cellular level as well as a population level. Published data show that animal protein promotes the growth of tumors. Animal protein increases the levels of a hormone, IGFL, which is a risk factor for cancer, and high casein, the main protein of cow's milk, diets allow more carcinogens into cells, which allow more dangerous carcino. Repeating histories 349. Gen products to bind to DNA, which allow more mutagenic reactions. that give rise to cancer cells, which allow more rapid growth of tumors. Once they are initially formed, data show that a diet based on animal-based foods increases a female's production of reproductive hormones over her lifetime, which may lead to breast cancer. We now have a deep and broad range of evidence showing that a whole foods, plant-based diet is best for cancer. Never before have we had technology to measure the biomarkers associated with diabetes, and the evidence to show that blood sugar, blood cholesterol and insulin levels improve more with a whole foods, plant-based diet than with any other treatment. Intervention studies show that type 2 diabetics treated with a whole foods, plant-based diet may reverse their disease and go off their medications. A broad range of international studies shows that type 1 diabetes, a serious autoimmune disease, is related to cow's milk consumption and premature weaning. We now know how our autoimmune system can attack our own bodies through a process of molecular mimicry induced by animal proteins that find their way into our bloodstream. We also have tantalizing evidence linking multiple sclerosis with animal food consumption, and especially dairy consumption. Dietary intervention studies have shown that diet can help slow, and perhaps even halt, multiple sclerosis. We now have a deep and broad range of evidence showing that a whole foods, plant-based diet is best for diabetes and autoimmune diseases. Never before have we had such a broad range of evidence showing that diets containing excess animal protein can destroy our kidneys. Kidney stones arise because the consumption of animal protein creates excessive calcium and oxalate in the kidney. We know now that cataracts and age-related macular degeneration can be prevented by foods containing large amounts of antioxidants. In addition, research has shown that cognitive dysfunction, vascular dementia caused by small strokes and Alzheimer's are all related to the food we eat. Investigations of human populations show that our risk of hip fracture and osteoporosis is made worse by diets high in animal-based foods. Animal protein leaches calcium from the bones by creating an acidic environment in the blood. We now have a deep and broad range of evidence showing that a whole foods, plant-based diet is best for our kidneys, bones, eyes and brains. More research can and should be done, but the idea that whole foods, plant-based diets can protect against and even treat a wide variety of chronic diseases can no longer be denied. No longer are there just a few people making claims about a plant-based diet based on their personal 350 the China study, experience, philosophy, or the occasional supporting scientific study. Now there are hundreds of detailed, comprehensive, well-done research studies that point in the same direction. Furthermore, one have hope for the future because of our new ability to exchange information across the country and around the world. A much greater proportion of the world population is literate, and a much greater proportion of that population has the luxury of choosing what they eat from a wide variety of readily accessible foods. People can make a whole foods, plant-based diet varied, interesting, tasty and convenient. One have hope because people in small towns and in previously isolated parts of the country can now readily access cutting-edge health information and put it into practice. All of these things together create an atmosphere unlike any other. An atmosphere that demands change. Contrary to the situation in 1982, when a few colleagues tried to destroy the reputations of scientists who suggested that diet had anything to do with cancer, it is now more commonly accepted that what you eat can determine your risk of multiple cancers. One have also seen the public image of vegetarianism emerge from being considered a dangerous, passing fad to a healthful, enduring lifestyle choice. The popularity of plant-based diets has been increasing, and both the variety and availability of convenient vegetarian foods have been skyrocketing. 14 restaurants around the country now regularly offer meat-free and dairy-free options. 15 scientists are publishing more articles about vegetarianism and writing more about the health potential of a plant-based diet. 16 now, over 150 years after my great-great-uncle George Maselwain wrote books about diet and disease, 1 am writing a book about diet and disease with the help of my youngest son Tom. Tom's middle name is McElwain. The family changed the spelling over the past couple of generations, which means that not only am one writing about many of the same ideas Maselwain wrote about, but a relative bearing his name is the co-author. History can repeat itself. This time, however, instead of the message being forgotten and confined to library stacks, one believed that the world is finally ready to accept it. More than that, one believed the world is finally ready to change. We have reached a point in our history where our bad habits can no longer be tolerated. We, as a society, are on the edge of a great precipice. We can fall to sickness, poverty, and degradation, or we can embrace health, longevity, and bounty. And all it takes is the courage to change. How will our grandchildren find themselves in 100 years? Only time will tell, but I hope that the history we are witnessing and the future that lies ahead will be to the benefit of us all. Q&A, protein effect in experimental rat studies. Could the dietary protein effect be due to other nutrients in the rat diet? Decreasing dietary protein from 20% to 5% means finding something to replace the missing 15%. We used a carbohydrate to replace the casein because it had the same energy content. As dietary protein decreased, a 1 mixture of starch and glucose increased by the same amount. The extra starch and glucose in the low-protein diets could not have been responsible for the lower development of foci because these carbohydrates, when tested alone, actually increase foci development. If anything, a little extra carbohydrate in the low-protein diet would only increase cancer incidence and offset the low-protein effect. This makes prevention of cancer by low-protein diets even more impressive. Might the protein effect be due to the rats on a low-protein diet eating less food, i.e., less calories? Many studies done in the 1930s, 1940s, and 1950s had shown that decreasing total food intake, or total calories, decreased tumor development. A review of our many experiments, however, showed that animals fed the low-protein diets did not consume less calories but, on 352 the China study, average, actually consumed more calories. 0.3. Again, this only reinforced the tumor-promoting effect observed for casein. What was the overall health of the rats on a low-protein diet? Many researchers have long assumed that animals fed diets this low in protein would not be healthy. However, the low-protein animals were healthier by every indication. They lived longer, were more physically active, were slimmer, and had healthy hair coats at 100 weeks, while the high-protein counterpart rats were all dead. Also, animals consuming less dietary casein not only ate more calories, but they also burned off more calories. Low-protein animals consumed more oxygen, which is required for the burning of these calories, and had higher levels of a special tissue called brown adipose tissue 5,6, which is especially effective in burning off calories. This occurs through a process of thermogenesis. i.e., the expenditure of calories as body heat. This phenomenon had already been demonstrated many years before. 7. 11 low-protein diets enhance the burning off of calories, thus leaving less calories for body weight gain and perhaps also less for tumor growth as well. Was physical activity related to the consumption of the low-protein diet? To measure the physical activity of each group of rats, we compared how much they voluntarily operated an exercise wheel attached to their cages. A monitor recorded the number of times the animals turned the exercise wheel. The Locassian animals 12 exercised about twice as much, when measured over a 2-week period. This observation seems to be very similar to how one feels after eating a high-protein meal, sluggish and sleepy. I have heard that a side effect of the protein-drenched Atkins diet is fatigue. Have you ever noticed this feeling in yourself after a high-protein meal? Experimental design of the China study. 65 counties in 24 different provinces, out of 27, were selected for the survey. They represented the full range of mortality rates for 7 of the more common cancers. They also provided broad geographic coverage and were within 4 hours travel time of a central laboratory. The survey counties represented semi-tropical coastal areas of southeast China, frigid wintry areas in northeast China, near Siberia, areas near the Great Gobi Desert and the northern steppes, and areas near or in the Himalaya mountains ranging from the far northwest to the far southwest part of the country. Except for suburban areas near Shanghai, most counties were located in rural China where people lived in the same place their entire lives and consumed locally produced food. Population densities varied widely, from 20,000 nomadic residents for the most remote county near the Great Gobi Desert, to 1.3 million people for the county on the outskirts of Shanghai. This survey is referred to as an ecological or correlation study design, meaning that we are comparing diet, lifestyle, and disease characteristics of a number of sample populations, in this case the 65 counties. We determine how these characteristics, as county averages, correlate. 354 the China study, or associate with each other. For example, how does dietary fat relate to breast cancer rates? Or how does blood cholesterol relate to coronary heart disease? How does a certain kind of fatty acid in red blood cells relate to rice consumption? We could also compare blood testosterone levels or estrogen levels with breast cancer risk. We did thousands of different comparisons of this type. In a study of this kind, it is important to note that only the average values for county populations are being compared. Individuals are not being compared with individuals. In reality, neither does any other epidemiological study design. As ecological studies go, this study, with its 65 counties, was unusually large. Most such studies only have 10 to 20 such population units, at most. Each of the 65 counties provided 100 adults for the survey. 1/2 were male and 1/2 female, all aged 35 to 64 years. The data were collected in the following manner. Each person volunteered a blood sample and completed a diet and lifestyle questionnaire. 1/2 of the people provided a urine sample. The survey teams went to 30% of the homes to carefully measure food consumed by the family over a 3-day period. Samples of food representing the typical diets at each survey site were collected at the local marketplace and were later analyzed for dietary and nutritional factors. One of the more important questions during the early planning Stages was how to survey for diet and nutrition information. Estimating. Consumption of food and nutrients from memory is a common method. But this is very imprecise, especially when mixed dishes are consumed. Can you remember what foods you ate last week, or even yesterday? Can you remember how much? Another even more crude method of estimating food intake is to see how much of each food is sold in the marketplace. These findings can give reasonable estimates of diet trends over time for whole populations, but they do not account for food waste or measure individual amounts of consumption. Although each of these relatively crude methods can be useful for certain purposes, they still are subject to considerable technical error and personal bias. And the bigger the technical error, the more difficult it is to detect significant cause-effect associations. We wanted to do better than crudely measure which foods and how. Experimental design of the China study 355. Much of these foods were being consumed. Thus we decided to evaluate nutritional conditions by analyzing blood and urine samples for indicators, biomarkers, of multiple nutrient intakes. These analyses would be far more objective than having people recall what they ate. Collecting and analyzing blood, however, was not easy to arrange, at least not in the way that we preferred. The initial problem was getting enough blood. For cultural reasons, rural Chinese were reluctant to provide blood samples. A finger prick seemed to be the only possibility, but this was not good enough. A regular vial of blood would give 100 times as much blood and allow for analyses of many more factors. Dr. Junshi Chen of our team, at the Institute of Nutrition and Food Hygiene in the Ministry of Health, had the unenviable task of convincing these volunteers to give a regular vial of blood. He succeeded. Sir Richard Peto at the University of Oxford of our team then made the very practical suggestion of combining the individual blood samples to make a big pool of blood for each village for each sex. This strategy gave more than 1,200 to 1,300 times more blood when compared with the finger prick method. Making big pools of blood had enormous implications and made possible the China study, as it later became known. It allowed analyses of far more indicators of diet and health. This allowed us to consider relationships in a far more comprehensive manner than would have otherwise been possible. For more detail on the theoretical and practical basis for collecting and analyzing blood in this way, the reader is referred to the original monograph of the study.l. After collecting the blood, we then had to decide who would do the many analyses that were possible. We wanted nothing but the best. While some analyses were conducted at our Cornell lab and at Dr. Chen's Beijing lab, the rest of the analyses, especially the more specialized types, were done in about 24 laboratories located in 6 countries and in 4 continents. Laboratories were selected because of their demonstrated expertise and interest. The laboratory participants are listed in the original monograph.l. How good is this study? Because this survey was a one-of-a-kind opportunity, we intended that it be the best of its kind ever undertaken. It was comprehensive, it was high quality, and its uniqueness allowed new opportunities to investigate diet and disease that were never before possible. These features 356. The China study of comprehensiveness, quality, and uniqueness greatly improved the credibility and reliability of the findings by far. Indeed, the New York Times, in a lead story in its science section, called the study the Grand Prix of epidemiological studies. Comprehensiveness of data. This survey was, and still is, the most comprehensive of its kind ever. undertaken. After all the blood, urine, and food samples were collected, stored and analyzed, and after the final results were tabulated and evaluated for quality, a few suspect results were not included in the final publication. We were able to study 367 variables. These represented a wide variety of dietary, lifestyle and disease characteristics, now included in a dense 896-page monograph. There were disease mortality rates on more than 48 different kinds of disease too. 109 nutritional, viral, hormonal and other indicators in blood. Over 24 urinary factors. Almost 36 food constituents, nutrients, pesticides, heavy metals. More than 36 specific nutrient and food intakes measured in the household survey. 60 diet and lifestyle factors obtained from questionnaires. And 17 geographic and climatic factors. The study was comprehensive, not only because of the sheer number of variables, but also because most of these variables varied over broad ranges, as with the cancer mortality rates. Broad ranges strengthened our ability to detect important previously undiscovered associations of variables. Quality of data. A number of features added quality to this study. The adults chosen for this survey were limited to those who were 35 to 64 years of age. This is the age range in which the diseases being investigated are more common. Information on death certificates of people older than 64 years was not included in the survey because this information was considered less reliable. Experimental design of the China study 357. In each of the 65 counties in the study, 2 villages were selected for the collection of the information. Having 2 villages in each county rather than one gives a more reliable county average. When the values of 2 villages are more similar to each other than to all the other counties, then this means higher quality data. 3. When possible, variables were measured by more than one kind of method. For example, iron status was measured in 6 different ways, riboflavin, vitamin B2 in 3 ways, and so forth. Also, in many cases, we could assess the quality and reliability of data by comparing variables known to have plausible biological relationships. The populations under study proved to be very stable. An average of 93 to 94% of the men in the survey were born in the county where they lived at the time of the survey. For women it was 89%. Also, according to data published by the World Bank for the diets at the time of our survey were very similar to those consumed in earlier years. This was ideal because those earlier years represented the time when the diseases were initially forming. Uniqueness of data. One idea that makes our study unique is our use of the ecologic study design. Critics of the ecologic study design correctly assume that it is a weak design for determining cause and effect associations when one is interested in the effects of single causes acting on single outcomes. But this is not the way that nutrition works. Rather, nutrition causes or prevents disease by multiple nutrients and other chemicals acting together, as in foods. An ecologic study is almost ideal if we wish to learn how an array of dietary factors act together to cause disease. It is the comprehensive effects of nutrients and other factors on disease occurrence where the most important lessons are to be learned. To investigate these comprehensive causes of disease, it was therefore necessary to record as many dietary and other lifestyle factors as possible, then formulate hypotheses and interpret data that represent comprehensiveness. Perhaps the most unique characteristic that set the study apart concerned the nutritional characteristics of the diets consumed in rural China. Virtually every other human study on diet and health, of whatever design, has involved subjects who were consuming a rich Western. 358 The China Study. Diet. This is true even when vegetarians are included in the study because 90% of vegetarians still consume rather large amounts of milk, cheese and eggs, while a significant number still consume some fish and poultry. As is shown in the accompanying chart, chart B.1.5, there is only a small difference in the nutritional properties of non-vegetarian and vegetarian diets as consumed in Western countries. Chart B.L, vegetarian and non-vegetarian diet. Comparisons among Westerners. Nutrient vegetarian non-vegetarian. Fat, percent of calories, 30 to 36, 34 to 38. Cholesterol, G/day, 150 to 300, 300 to 500. Carbohydrates, percent of calories, 50 to 55. Total protein, percent of calories, 12 to 14, 14 to 18. Animal protein, percent of total protein, 40 to 60, 60 to 70. A strikingly different dietary situation existed in China. In America, 15 to 17% of our total calories is provided by protein, and upwards of 80% of this amount is animal-based. In other words, we gorge on protein and we get most of it from meat and dairy products. But in rural China, they consume less protein overall, 9 to 10% of total calories, and only 10% of it comes from animal-based foods. This means that there are many other major nutritional differences in the Chinese and American diets, as shown in chart B.2.L. Chart B.2, Chinese and American dietary intakes. Nutrient China United States. Calories, kcal/kg body weight/day, 40.6 30.6. Total fat, percent of calories, 14.5 34 to 38. Dietary fiber, G/day, 3312. Total protein, G/day, 6491. Animal protein, percent of total calories, 0.8 * 10 to 11. Total iron, mg/day, 3418. Non-fish animal protein. Experimental design of the HENA study 359. This was the first and only large study that investigated this range of dietary experience and its health consequences. Chinese diets ranged from rich to very rich in plant-based foods. In all other studies done on Western subjects, diets ranged from rich to very rich in animal-based foods. It was this distinction that made the China study so different from other studies. Making it happen. Organization and conduct of a study of this size, scope, and quality was possible because of the exceptional skills of Dr. Junqi Chen. Survey. Sites were scattered across the far reaches of China. In American travel distances, they ranged from the Florida Keys to Seattle, Washington, and from San Diego, California, to Bangor, Maine. Travel between these places was more difficult than in the United States, and supplies and instructions for the survey had to be in place and standardized for all collection sites. And this was done before emails, fax machines, and cellular phones were available. It was important that the 24 provincial health teams, each comprised of 12 to 15 health workers, be trained to carry out the blood, food, and urine collections and complete the questionnaires in a systematic and standardized manner. To standardize the collection of information, Dr. Chen divided the country into regions. Each region sent trainers to Beijing for the senior training session. They, in turn, returned to their home provinces to train the provincial health teams. Although the U.S. National Cancer Institute, NCI, of the National Institutes of Health, NIH, provided the initial funding for this project, the Chinese Ministry of Health paid the salaries of the approximately 350 health workers. It is my estimate that the Chinese contribution to the project was approximately $5 to $6 million. This compares with the U.S. contribution of about $2.9 million over a 10-year period. Were the U.S. government to have paid for this service in a similar project in the U.S., it would have cost at least 10 times this amount, or $50 to $60 million. The vitamin D connection. The most impressive evidence favoring plant-based diets is the way that so many food factors and biological events are integrated to maximize health and minimize disease. Although the biological processes are exceptionally complex, these factors still work together as a beautifully choreographed, self-correcting network. It is exceptionally impressive, especially the coordination and control of this network. Perhaps a couple of analogies might help to illustrate such a process. Flocks of birds in flight or schools of fish darting about are able to shift direction in a microsecond without bumping into each other. They seem to have a collective consciousness that knows where they are going and when they will rest. Colonies of ants and swarms of bees also integrate varying labor chores with great proficiency, but as amazing as these animal activities are, have you ever thought about how their behaviors are coordinated with such finesse? I see these same characteristics, and more, in the way that the countless factors of plant-based foods work their magic to create health at all levels within our body, among our organs and between our cells and among the enzymes and other subcellular particles within our cells. For those unfamiliar with biomedical research laboratories, the walls of these labs are often covered with large posters showing thousands of biochemical reactions operating within our bodies. These are reactions that are known, far more remain to be discovered. The interdependence of these reactions with each other is especially informative, even awesome in its implications.
362 The China Study. An example of a very small portion of this enormous network of reactions is the effect of vitamin D and its metabolites on several of the diseases discussed in this book. This particular network illustrates a complex interconnection between the inner workings of our cells, the food we eat, and the environment in which we live. Chart CL. Although some of the vitamin D present in our bodies may come from food, we can usually get all that we need from a few hours of sunshine each week. In fact, it is our ability to make our vitamin D that leads to the idea that it is not a vitamin, it is a hormone, i.e., made in one part of our body but functioning in another part. The sun's UV rays make vitamin D from a precursor chemical located in our skin. Provided we get adequate sunshine, this is all the vitamin D we need. We can, of course, also get vitamin D from fortified milk, certain fish oils, and some vitamin supplements. The vitamin D made in our skin then travels to our liver, where it is converted by an enzyme to a vitamin D metabolite. This metabolite's main function is to serve as the body's storage form of vitamin D, while remaining mostly in the liver but also in body fat. The next step is the crucial one. When needed, some of the storage form of vitamin D in the liver is transported to the kidney, where another enzyme converts it into a supercharged vitamin D metabolite, which is called 1,25-D. The rate at which the storage form of vitamin D is converted to the supercharge 1,25D is a crucial reaction in this network. The 1,25D metabolite does most of the important work of vitamin D in our bodies. This supercharge 1,25D is about 1,000 times more active than the storage vitamin D. Supercharge 1,25D only survives for 6 to 8 hours once it is made. In contrast, our storage vitamin D survives for 20 days or more. 2. 3. This demonstrates an important principle typically found in networks like this: the far greater activity, the far shorter lifetime, and the far lower amounts of the 1,25D end product provide a very responsive system wherein the 1,25D can quickly adjust its activity minute by minute and microsecond by microsecond as long as there is sufficient storage vitamin D to draw from. Small changes, making a big difference, can occur quickly. The relationship between the storage form of vitamin D and the supercharge 1,25D is like having a large tank of natural gas buried in our yard, storage vitamin D, but carefully using only a very tiny amount of gas to light the burner at our stovetop. It is critical that the amount and timing of gas 1,25D coming to our stovetop be carefully at vitamin 0 connection. Chart CL, the vitamin D network. Super CLLILRGED. Regulated, regardless of how much there may be in the tank, whether it is low or whether it is full. However, it is also useful that we maintain an adequate supply in our storage tank. In the same way, it is critical that the kidney enzyme in this reaction has a soft, sensitive touch, so to speak, as it produces the right amount of the 1,25D at the right time for its very important work. One of the more important things that vitamin D does, mostly through its conversion to supercharge 1,25D, is to control the development of a wide variety of serious diseases. For the sake of simplicity, this is schematically represented by showing the inhibition of the conversion of healthy tissue to diseased tissue by 1,25D. 4 to 12. So far, we can see how adequate sunshine exposure, by ensuring enough storage form of vitamin D, helps to prevent cells from becoming diseased. This suggests that certain diseases might be more common in areas of the world where there is less sunshine, in countries nearer the North and South Poles. Indeed, there is such evidence. To be more specific, in the Northern Hemisphere, communities that are farther north tend to have more type 1 diabetes, multiple sclerosis, rheumatoid arthritis, osteoporosis, breast cancer, prostate cancer, and colon cancer, in addition to other diseases. Researchers have known for 80 years that multiple sclerosis, for example, is associated with increasing latitude. 13. As you can see in Chart C2, there is a huge difference in MS prevalence as one goes away from the equator, being over 100 times more prevalent in the far north than at the equator. 14. Similarly, in Australia, there is less sunshine and Chart C2, worldwide distribution of MS for 120 countries. More MS as one goes farther south. R equals 91%. 0.15 megasiemens is about sevenfold greater in southern 43s than in northern Australia 19 feet 5.16. A lack of sunshine, however, is not the only factor related to these diseases. There is a larger context. The first thing to note is the control and coordination of these vitamin D related reactions. Control operates at several places in this network, but, as I already said, it is the conversion of storage vitamin D into the supercharged 1,25D in the kidneys that is especially critical. In considerable measure, this control is exercised by another complex network of reactions involving a manager type hormone produced by the parathyroid gland located in our neck. Chart C3. When, for example, we need more 1,25D, parathyroid hormone induces the kidney enzyme activity to produce more 1,25D. When there is enough 1,25D, parathyroid hormone slows down the kidney enzyme. But vitamin D connection 365. Activity. Within seconds, parathyroid hormone manages how much 1,25D there will be at each time and place. Parathyroid hormone also acts as a conductor at several other places in this network, as shown by the several arrows. By being aware of the role of each player in its orchestra, it coordinates, controls, and finely tunes these reactions as a conductor. Would a symphony orchestra, under optimal conditions, sunshine exposure alone can supply all the vitamin D that we need to produce the all-important 1,25D at the right time? Even the elderly, who are not able to produce as much vitamin D from sunshine, have nothing to worry about if there is enough sunshine. Why? How much is enough? If you know how much sunshine causes a slight redness of your skin, then 1/4 of this amount, provided 2 to 3 times per week, is more than adequate to meet our vitamin D needs and to store some in our liver and body fatty. If your skin becomes slightly red after about 30 minutes in the sun, then 10 minutes, 3 times per week will be enough exposure to get plenty of vitamin D. When and if we don't get enough sunshine, it may be helpful to consume vitamin D from our diets. Almost all of the vitamin D found in our diet has been artificially added to foods like milk and breakfast cereals. Along with vitamin supplements, this amount of vitamin D can be quite significant, and under certain circumstances, there is some evidence that this practice may be beneficial. 18 to 21. In this scheme, sunshine and parathyroid hormone work together in a marvelously coordinated way to keep this system running smoothly, both in filling our vitamin D tank and in helping to produce from moment to moment the exact amount of 1,25D that we need. When it comes to getting sufficient sunshine or getting vitamin D in food, taking light from the sun makes far more sense. Throwing wrenches into the system. There are several studies now showing that if 1,25D remains at consistently low levels, the risk of several diseases increases. So then the question is, what causes low levels of 1,25D? Animal protein containing foods cause a significant decrease in 1,25D22. These proteins create an acidic environment in the blood that blocks the kidney enzyme from producing this very important metabolite. 23. A second factor that influences this process is calcium. Calcium in our blood is crucial for optimum muscle and nerve functioning, and it 366 EHINA STUDY. Chart C3. Role of the parathyroid hormone in the regulation of supercharged 1,25D must be maintained within a fairly narrow range. The 1,25D keeps the blood levels of calcium operating within this narrow range by monitoring and regulating how much calcium is absorbed from food being digested in the intestine, how much calcium is excreted in the urine and feces, and how much is exchanged with the bone, the big supply tank. for the body's calcium. For example, if there is too much calcium in the blood, 1,25D becomes less active, less calcium is absorbed and more calcium is excreted. It is a very sensitive balancing act in our bodies. As blood calcium goes up, 1,25D goes down, and when blood calcium goes down, 1,25D goes up 0.10. 24. Here's the kicker. If calcium consumption is unnecessarily high, it lowers the activity of the kidney enzyme. And, as a consequence, the level of 1,25D.1.25, in other words, routinely consuming high calcium diets is not in our best interests. The blood levels of 1,25D therefore are depressed both by consuming too much animal protein and too much calcium. Animal-based food, with its protein, depresses 1,25D. Cow's milk, however, is high, both in protein and calcium. In fact, in one of the more extensive studies on MS that is associated with lower levels of 1,25D, cow's milk was found to be as important a factor as latitude mentioned earlier. 26. For example, the association of MS with latitude and sunshine shown in chart C2 also is seen with animal-based foods shown in chart C.4.14. One could hypothesize that diseases like MS are due, at least in part, to a lack of sunshine and lower vitamin D status. This is supported by the observation that northern people living along coastlines, e.g., Norway, have vitamin 0 connection 367. And Japan, 26, who consume lots of vitamin D-rich fish have less MS than people living inland. However, in these fish-eating communities with lower rates of disease, much less cow's milk is consumed. Consuming cow's milk has been shown to associate with MS 26 and type 1 diabetes 27, independent of fish intake. In another reaction associated with this network, increased intakes of animal protein also enhance the production of insulin-like growth factor IGF-1, first introduced in Chapter 8, and this enhances cancer cell growth. 5. In effect, there are many reactions acting in a coordinated and mutually consistent way to cause disease when a diet high in animal protein is consumed. When blood levels of 1,25D depressed, IGF-1 simultaneously becomes more active. Together, these factors increase the birth of new cells while simultaneously inhibiting the removal of old cells, both favoring the development of cancer. 7 studies cited BIS. For example, people with higher than normal blood levels of IGF-1 have been shown to have 5.1 times the risk of Chart C4 worldwide distribution of calorie consumption from animal-based foods for 120 countries 14. Advanced stage prostate cancer 0.28 if combined with low blood levels of a protein that inactivates IGF-I29, more IGF-L activity, there is 9.5 times the risk of advanced stage prostate cancer. 2s. This level of disease risk is alarming. Fundamental to it all is the fact that animal-based foods like meat and dairy 3Q32 lead to more IGF-I and less 1,25D, both of which increase cancer risk. These are only a few of the factors and events associated with this vitamin D network. With the right food and environment, these events and reactions cooperate in an integrated manner to produce health benefits. In contrast, when the wrong food is consumed, its adverse effects are mediated by not one, but many, of the reactions within this network. Also, many factors in such foods, even beyond the protein and calcium, participate in causing the problem. And, finally, it often is not one disease but many that are likely to occur. What impresses me about this and other networks is the convergence of so many disease-causing factors operating through so many different reactions to produce a common result. When that common result is more than one disease, it is even more impressive. When these various factors are found in one type of food and this food is epidemiologically related to one or more of these diseases, the associations become still more impressive. This example begins to explain why dairy foods would be expected to increase the risk of these diseases. There is no way that so many intricate mechanisms, operating in such synchrony to produce the same result, are only a random unimportant happenstance. Nature would not have been so devious as to refine such a useless internally conflicting maze. Networks like this exist throughout the body and within the cells. But of even more importance, they are highly integrated into a far larger dynamic called life. About the authors. For more than 40 years, T. Colin Campbell has been at the forefront of nutrition research. His legacy, the China study, is the most comprehensive study of health and nutrition ever conducted. Dr. Campbell is Jacob Gould Sherman Professor Emeritus of Nutritional Biochemistry at Cornell University. He has received more than 70 grant years of peer-reviewed research funding and authored more than 300 research papers. The China study was the culmination of a 20-year partnership of Cornell University, Oxford University, and the Chinese Academy of Preventive Medicine. A 1999 graduate of Cornell University, Thomas Campbell is currently pursuing a career in medicine. In addition, he is a writer, actor, and 3-time marathon runner. Born and raised in Ithaca, NY, he has appeared on stage in London, Chicago, and most of the states east of the Mississippi River. Mr. Campbell enjoys playing soccer, skiing, and hiking. Colin Campbell's The China Study is an important book, and a highly readable one. With his son, Tom, Colin studies the relationship between diet and disease, and his conclusions are startling. The China Study is a story that needs to be heard. Robert C. Richardson, Ph.D., Nobel Prize winner, Professor of Physics and Vice Provost of Research, Cornell University. The China Study gives critical, life-saving nutritional information. Dr. Campbell's expose of the research and medical establishment makes this book a fascinating read and one that could change the future for all of us. Joel Fuhrman, Aide, author of Eat to Live. The study can be considered the Grand Prix of epidemiology. The New York Times. The science is clear. The results are unmistakable. Change your diet and dramatically reduce your risk of cancer, heart disease, diabetes, and obesity. By any measure, America's health is failing. We spend far more per capita on healthcare than any other society in the world, and yet 2/3 of Americans are overweight, and more than 15 million Americans have diabetes. We fall prey to heart disease as often as we did 30 years ago. The war on cancer, launched in the 1970s, has been a miserable failure. Half of all Americans have a health problem that requires taking a prescription drug every week, and more than 100 million Americans have high cholesterol. To make matters worse, we are leading our youth down a path of disease earlier in their lives. 1/3 of the children in this country are overweight or at risk of becoming overweight, our kids are increasingly falling prey to a form of diabetes that used to be seen only in adults, and children now take more prescription drugs than ever before. These issues all come down to three things: breakfast, lunch, and dinner. The China study presents a clear and concise message of hope as it dispels a multitude of health myths and misinformation. If you want to be healthy, change your diet.